Good morning. On behalf of the Bounce Coalition and the Kentucky Youth Advocates, I want to welcome you as we talk about this very important topic of recognizing trauma in a virtual environment. We started planning the October Grand Rounds over a year ago, and we had not even heard of COVID-19. And here we are today doing a virtual Grand Rounds. And we think it's going to be a great program, and we're really happy that you've joined us. We know you are all busy people, and thank you for taking the time to learn more about this topic and support our community with your efforts. I would like now to turn the program over to BJ Adkins, who's going to talk a little bit about our partnership, about the Bounce Coalition partnership with Kentucky Youth Advocates. BJ?
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with many of you again. I know it's been quite a journey over the last 8 months as we all find our way through COVID-19, and we are going to get to the other side of this, I promise. Bounce, as you know, has been around since we began our work probably 7 years ago, and we did that under the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. We will always have great gratitude to the foundation for their vision, which helped set the course of Bounce by defining what it would look like while we chose what Bounce would do. So that was an important piece of us. As we continued to grow, we found more opportunities. And actually, we were under the Community Foundation of Louisville, and we had outgrown our incubation there. So we had 2 opportunities. We decided to go with Kentucky Youth Advocates as our backbone agency. What that did for Bounce, it provided a support system that folks who were volunteering, working other time on other jobs, didn't have the time to devote as much energy as Bounce needed and deserved. So we're very fortunate that we have a financial structure through KYA, we have program management through KYA, and a joint leadership. We also have a voice on the statewide level. We are continuing our partnership with the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. That is always going to be an integral piece of Bounce since it is our foundational piece. But we are very grateful for the opportunities that KYA has given us. It's opened up many funding streams that we wouldn't have been able to do on our own because of how busy we were. All of this came about in March 2020. So while we had hoped a big bang would happen, COVID happened. So that set us on another path. So hopefully down the road, we'll find time to get together and to celebrate this journey. In the meantime, you're important to us. Bounce has opportunity for you to get involved in committee work and vision work, and as we continue our structure and rooted in helping Bounce grow. So if you want to go to Bounce's website, see what we're doing, if there's opportunity that you want to get involved with policy work, with this amazing learning collaborative we're doing today, the Bounce Grand Rounds, there's the committee that helps structure that as well. We have our training committee. We are always welcoming people to become trainers for Bounce. So the opportunities are very plentiful. So please feel free to continue working with us and to continue to be a part of Bounce. And actually, if you want to get into the core of Bounce. So we welcome you. I want to take a minute to thank Naomi, Barbara, Bev, Alice, and our support of KYA in setting up the Bounce Grand Rounds. It has been an amazing journey and a tremendous learning collaborative. So thank you for all your hard work, your flexibility to be able to put this on virtually. So sit back, enjoy. We hope that you take away some very important information and that you give us some very important information. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Naomi.
Thank you, BJ, and thank you everyone for being here. We are excited about the program that we have for you today. As you know, typically we usually do a case study or 2 case studies, and then we get your thoughts and ideas on that case study and how to move forward. We've switched it up a little bit, knowing that we are doing things virtually. We decided to do things differently. And so let's first look at the agenda. So Carly, if you'll pull up the agenda for us. And so on our agenda, we have the welcome and by Barbara and BJ. I'm just going to do an overview of the day and do a few polling questions. We're going to have a panel discussion that's facilitated by Joe Bargione with a few resident experts that we have in the Bounce family. And our topic today is really important in recognizing trauma in a virtual setting. And then we'll have an opportunity, because you cannot have a grand rounds without that opportunity to process and think collaboratively. So we'll do some breakout discussions, and then we'll do some final wrap up with questions from you guys, from the audience, if we have time at the end, that will go to the panelists. Thank you, Carly. And so we want to start by pulling up the polling questions, the pre-polling questions that we asked you. But we wanted to get a sense of how you were feeling as a part of this process and just throughout the pandemic, because we're all in a different place. And so we'll just go for some, you can just show it that way, Carly. That's perfect. Thank you. So the very first question is to what extent has COVID-19 affected your daily life? And as you can see that over 99% of you said that it has somewhat affected or very affected your life. As we all know that we've had to change, just like we're doing this virtually. Question number 2 was, to what extent are you worried about the impact of COVID-19 on the well-being of family, friends, and colleagues? And again, as you can see, that most people are somewhat or very worried about the impact of COVID-19 on your family, friends, and colleagues. Question number 3 is, to what extent has the organization with which you are affiliated made operational changes that support you and your family during the pandemic? And you'll see that it's about 90% have had at least some helpful operational changes or extreme operational changes. I work for Jefferson County Public Schools, and as you know, we've had some huge changes because students are working from home, parents are working from home, our teachers and our staff members, district office is where I work, we're all working from home, finding ways to survive during this pandemic. And then the last question is, how have you engaged in self-care during the pandemic? And for this one, if you'll notice that we gave a few options, but what I love is that 20% of you had options that were not listed. And so that tells me that we all are doing things to promote self-care for ourselves, for our friends and families, and for others. And even as a part of our discussion today, the panel will talk about self-care, because it is up to us to take care of ourselves and the people around us. And so we have a couple of polling questions that we wanted to do right here on the spot. And so Carly's going to pull up the questions, and the first one is, how concerned are you about the impact of COVID on the education and social emotional well-being of kids in the community? And if you will hit your response and hit submit, we'll give everyone just a minute or two to respond. With response.
Looks like just about everybody has responded. So I will go ahead and end that poll and share the results.
And so if you notice that 97% are very concerned or extremely concerned. There are a few that are moderately concerned, but everyone has some concern. And that's why we're here today, is because we want to give you some strategies that can help with that, help you throughout the process of living through a pandemic and dealing with trauma in a virtual setting. We have one more question for you. And this one is kind of like, your best guess, because we know that this is just kind of, I hate to call it a fun question, but we just wanted to know what your thoughts were. When do you think things will be back to normal again? Whatever normal means now. And again, we'll give you just a minute to think about that question, process it, and respond. Awesome, thank you, Carly. And so, as you can see, it's interesting. A couple people are very optimistic and they think that things are going to be back to normal again in January, a few more in March, June for about a third of the folks on the call, and then 2/3 pretty much say you have no idea. And I think we're all feeling that way. Is that, even if we're thinking optimistically and wanting to put a date on the end of what we're in right now, really and truly, we just have to wait and see and be hopeful that everyone that we know and love is going to make it through, and we just continue to persevere. And so with that, I'd love to turn this over to Joe Barzione, who's going to introduce the panel and lead the panel discussion.
Thank you, Naomi. I'm Joe Barzione. I'm on the executive council with Bounce, and I'm also one of the trainers. And I'm really excited this morning to have the opportunity to facilitate the conversation for a good portion of our morning together on recognizing trauma in a virtual setting. And I really like the last poll question that Naomi put up there. I believe we're going to have a new normal moving forward, whatever that looks like. And so, we have to adjust, and our world has been turned upside down in March of 2013 as we all work with kids and families. Some of us work in educational institutions, both K through 12 and higher ed. Some of us work for social services, public health districts, out of school time providers, and advocacy roles. And so all of our worlds have turned upside down. And I think we're all learning to adapt that despite what's going on with the pandemic, the work continues. And so we have to think creatively in being able to support our kids. So I think it's so timely that our topic this morning is recognizing trauma in a virtual setting, because I think at least for the foreseeable future, that's the setting most of us are going to be working in as we work to support kids throughout the Commonwealth. So I'm excited to announce we have 3 great presenters, panelists this morning who are experts in this field. And so I'll introduce them now. And then what I ask that each of the panelists do is just take a moment to tell us a little about who you are and what you do in your support of kids. So first up is Dr. Jen Driscoll, who's a resource teacher in the Social Emotional Learning and Trauma-Informed Care Unit of the Jefferson County Public Schools. So Jen, if you would take a moment and tell us who you are.
Good morning. I work for Jefferson County Public Schools. I train educators on better understanding students who have severe or extreme trauma. And then I also work with them on developing behavior strategies or just working with those students in the classroom setting or now in the virtual setting, and then identifying those traumatic stress reactions and then what we can do to better support those students on a day-to-day basis. So I'm really excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Jen, and we're looking forward to learning a lot from you, from your perspective as a person who works in a school setting. Up next is Dr. Tony Zippel, who also is affiliated with the Bounce Coalition. Tony?
And let me come off of mute. Good to see everybody this morning. As Joe said, I've worked with the Bounce Coalition since the very early days. And continue to do training and consultation and materials development with Bounce. In the rest of my life, I am a consultant working in the area of resilience, trauma, and positive psychology, and doing training and development and consultation in those kinds of areas in the United States and in Asia.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. And our final panelist this morning is Elizabeth Wessels Martin, who's the Chief Executive Officer, CEO with the Center for Women and Family here in Louisville, Kentucky. Elizabeth?
Oh, thank you, Joe, and good morning, everybody. It's so wonderful to see everybody, and thank you for attending the Grand Rounds. So yes, I'm Elizabeth Wessels Martin, and I am president, and actually the E stands for Chief Empowerment Officer here at the Center for Women and Families. And we are the seven counties in Kentucky and 2 counties in Southern Indiana, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and sexual assault resource center, emergency crisis center, and shelter. And the empowerment is because we empower victims and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault here in the center. And that includes the children. We know that domestic violence, intimate partner violence, has an incredible traumatic impact on children who live in those environments, whether they witness it or they hear it. And so we serve families. And on any given day in our 80-bed shelter, we may have 10 children, we may have 20 children. We had 5 children born during the height of COVID. So children are very much an integral part of the work that we do here at the center. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate that. Okay, so what are we going to do in this next section? The 3 panelists are going to give us their perspective, and we actually have 4 framing questions that we're going to ask the panelists during this part. And so the first question for everyone is, how do we provide family support during non-traditional instruction? And we're going to have Jen start with that conversation, and then Elizabeth, Tony, if you have any thoughts on that, feel free to jump in. Then the second question during the discussion will be, what strategies can you suggest for managing in the virtual setting at home? And Tony will be up first on that. The third question is, what are the warning signs for intervention when we have concerns about kids? And Elizabeth will be the first one up in that section. And then the final one, which I think is just as important as we support kids, is also supporting ourselves. So the final question will be, what are self-care strategies for adults in a virtual setting? How do you bounce back in the face of some challenging brought on by the pandemic? Okay. And then as we're going through the panel discussion, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and Carly will be monitoring the chat box. Once this section's done, we will then be going into a breakout session, breakout rooms, and we'll touch upon that after we finish this section. So the first question will go to Jen, and is, how do we provide family support during non-traditional instructional time?
I think one of the things that we have to do while we're working to provide family support during this collective traumatic experience is to provide a psychologically safe space for our families to come. And so one of the things that we're working to do throughout JCPS is to train all of our educators on how to support our families and our students throughout NTI on what this traumatic experience is. And so we're trying to make sure that our educators understand how to be trauma informed throughout NTI. What does it look like to recognize traumatic stress reactions through the virtual screen? And then how do you support your students, and how do you support their families? And so we're really creating videos, we're creating tip sheets, we're sending out newsletters, and then we're encouraging our parents to then know that it's okay to come and talk to us as educators, but also we're then also sending that information and putting it in the family's hands, because our kids are experiencing really big emotions, all of them from grades K through 12, that they don't know what to do, but they also don't know how to name it and claim it. And so we're really empowering our schools to be that safe space, to know that we can come together as a team and have those conversations. And so the first thing that we really have to do, and we're really trying to work to do, is to realize that we're a team in this. Nobody has to be a silo, and that together we can kind of combat some of these things that we're going through.
Thank you. John, thank you. I just have a quick question. You mentioned, I really like the idea of you folks working with the educators in JCPS and creating videos to help them to become more trauma informed and how to support the students in your district. We probably have on the Zoom call meeting today, we probably have educators from other school districts around the state. If people have questions about what you're doing in JCPS, is it okay for them to reach out to you?
please reach out. One of the beautiful things about education is that we steal. And so please reach out. I'll put my email address and you can contact me. We can talk about some of the things that we're doing. And they may have great ideas that we want to steal. And so the great thing about this is that, you know, we need each other, especially during this time, because we're kind of building the plane as we're flying it. And so our educators need as much support as they can get. So if there's something that we're doing really well, I'd love to share it. But if they have a great idea that we could use to support our teachers, hey, I could use it also, because our teachers need as much support as they can so that we can support our families. Because I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I know what it feels like to be working all day and also helping them figure out how to do algebra. So we need to be able to support our parents and our educators as we do this really difficult work.
Great, thank you. Maybe you can put in the chat your email address in the chat.
You got it?
That'd be great. Okay, so then the second question we have is for Tony. What strategies can you suggest for managing in the virtual setting in the home?
I think there are a couple of things that are important, and I really like Jen's comment about the importance of providing support for educators and for parents around managing this situation, because all of us are facing new things. We're all learning together, and to create structure so that we can learn from each other and move forward in the best way possible is important. I think there are two things that I want to touch on that are particularly important. The first is creating, routines and rituals in the home. One of the things that we know about the way that all of us behave is that most of our behavior is triggered by external circumstances. It's a matter of habit. We don't get up in the morning and say, gee, let me think a lot about whether I want to brush my teeth or not. We just do it because it's the way that it's organized and it's habitual and it's a routine that we have. Going to school and what happened in school formed another whole set of routines for young people, and that's been disrupted. So we need to find a way to build new routines, new structures, new rituals at home that take the place of that. And so that takes some planning and thinking about what the sequence of activities is going to be, what the reminders are going to be around us to make sure that that happens, and then support for making sure that that's persistent and that we do it day after day and that it becomes kind of a grooved part of who we are and how the day is organized, and things stay more predictable because we do a little bit better when things are predictable for us. So that's the first part, creating routines and rituals for school at home, just like we have routines and rituals at school when we were there physically. I think the second thing that's important with this is to build into those rituals and routines room for working on personal resilience. We know that in day-to-day life, all of us get bumped around. Stress and trauma is just a part of life for all of us. But that's been amplified by COVID, and it makes everything much more difficult. So it takes special attention to building in some steps for resilience and self-care into those rituals and routines that we have at home. And we saw some of those in the early poll that was shared about what people are doing for self-care, but basics like building in time for exercise, making sure that we're getting enough sleep and that our sleep hygiene is good and that it's happening on a regular basis is important. Time for social connection, and if we can't do a lot of it face-to-face, at least social connection virtually counts for a lot. Paying attention to mindfulness and gratitude, building those sorts of things into our rituals and routines really counts for a lot. So rituals, routines, predictability, structure, and building into those routines great self-care steps, I think would be the couple of things that are really important to consider.
Thank you, Tony. I really liked when you talked about like the three key drivers from what you're talking about is the routines and structure and rituals and building resiliency, which is one of the things Bounce is all about, is building resiliency in kids, families, and communities. And then also that social connectiveness, whether it's with family members or people at work or people in your community. How do you find ways to make sure we're all stay connected with each other? during the pandemic.
You
So I
say, Joe,
appreciate
that's really hot all over the world right now. I just had the opportunity to do some workshops on resilience for a very large group in Singapore and the Philippines and Malaysia, and exactly the same questions being asked there. So globally, these are challenges that we're facing.
Thank you. You know, as I mentioned earlier, in our Zoom meeting today, we have professionals from all different organizations across the spectrum who work with kids. We all have an obligation as professionals and adults in our Commonwealth that if we suspect the child's being abused or neglected, we have an obligation to call Child Protective Services or the local law enforcement. You know, with the pandemic, one of the things I think what we've seen is an actual drop in calls going into Child Protective Services. Part of the reason I believe that is because so many of us on this call today are in roles where if we see something when we're working with our kids and our families, if we see where we suspect abuse or neglect, we have an obligation to call. And so I think now that since March of 2020 in the pandemic, we've had to do a lot of the work in our interactions with kids virtually. So I think that's created some difficulties for us. And so, you know, how do we, you know, if we're going to be interacting with kids virtually, you know, what are the warning signs that we should be looking for? And that section of this panel discussion is going to be led by Elizabeth. So I'll turn it over to Elizabeth, and you can share with us some of your thoughts and ideas and strategies when we're working with young people in a virtual setting, regardless of the organization we work for. What are some of the warning signs we should be looking for?
Excuse me. So thank you, Joe. And that's, you know, let me just reiterate what you were saying about the concern of the drop in reports, because I know here at the center, we saw a 30% drop in our crisis calls, which concerned us gravely, not only for, excuse me, my allergies, not only for the victims, the parent, but also for kids, because we get a lot of, we make our fair share of child abuse calls to the hotline as well, because oftentimes when a parent calls in to ask for support, safety planning, they will also share with us that, you know, there's children in the home that are also being abused by the perpetrators. And so one of the things that we know with kids is that educators are the #1 source for giving reports, and teachers are often, you know, one of the most trusted adults in children's lives. And so not having that face-to-face contact is a real concern. However, the good thing is that with NTI, the educators do have an opportunity to get some understanding. They do have an opportunity to scan the children's, you know, physical appearance. What does the child look like? You can also have an opportunity to scan their background. What do you see behind them? What do you see around them? Do you see some signs of substance abuse? Is there something sitting on a coffee table behind the child? You know, does the home look neglected? Is a child sitting in the dark and there's no lights on? There doesn't appear to be any other activity going on in the home. Does it appear to be dirty? Are there any signs of violence? Do you see anything broken around the child? As the weather gets colder, do you notice that the child appears to be cold? And so asking some of those questions. Some of the other things that you might be looking for is the child not showing up? I know we've had some conversations with our parents here about the importance of treating NTI just like normal class. Are they not participating like they once did? Have they become disengaged, not interested? Are they falling asleep? Are they, you know, is this a child that typically wasn't always quiet and now you're finding that they're being unusually quiet or maybe unusually active? They don't appear to be able to concentrate, very disconnected from what's going on, because we know that trauma creates a disconnection. And so are they disconnected from what's happening and from the conversation that's going on the Zoom call? They're not turning in assignments. Maybe they once were a pretty, you know, high-performing student and now they're not even turning in assignments. There's also some physical things to look for. Are you seeing any injuries on the child? Are you seeing bruising? For our smaller children, the Face It put out a lot of great information on what we call the 10-4 red flags For children ages 4 years and younger, are you seeing any bruising or mark on their torso, ears, and neck? Those are not places that you would see bruising on children of that age. So looking for things that seem odd or seem unusual, again, looking in their physical space, looking in their environment, and looking on the child. Make sure you look your children in the eye. You can tell a lot by looking in their eye, by how they talk and what they say. The number one intervention, and I hope all teachers are doing this, is require that your students keep their camera on at all time. Don't let them turn their camera off and be disconnected. That is a real concern. We also encourage teachers, if you have the opportunity, to please maybe spend some one-to-one time with that student. Talk with them just like you would in the class. If in the class you might ask them to come up to your desk, or stay after for a few minutes, or meet with you ahead of time, do the same thing on the Zoom. Ask them in a very gentle manner, how are they doing? How are things at home? If there's anything that you know about the family that's gone on, ask them about that. How's mom doing? Did she go back to work? If these are younger children and they tell you that mom did go back to work, who's staying at home with you? Ask some questions. Children want the adults, they need to know that they matter, and so they want the adults to ask those questions. Also, it's really important that we say, listen to how they tell you stories. Listen to their answers. How do they say it? What are they saying? And also be careful that you're not asking judgmental questions and that your reaction is not judgmental. Listen with empathy. You don't want the children to think if they tell you something that your reaction is going to give them the impression that now they've said something wrong, because they will oftentimes pull back and stop talking with you. And so you want to make sure that you continue to keep that strong relationship with their kids. We've had some pretty amazing things happen here. We've had teachers show up here with hotspots, even though we do have Wi-Fi, and we are doing NTI as a group, keeping the kids socially distanced. But we've had teachers drop by here. So one of the things that I know from talking to some teachers is they've taken food or school supplies to the house. So again, find out, what is your children missing? Again, treat it just like you would a regular classroom. If you do recognize or you do get information that there's something going on in the home, you can also call the crisis line here and give us some information. Of course, you are mandated to call Child Protective Services if you have any suspicion that something is going on. If you have a relationship with the parent and you find out that something's happening or there's suspicion of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, reach out to that mom, reach out to that dad. I want to reiterate dads. We have 3 dads in the center right now. So men women it's 1 in 3 and men it's 1 in 5 in the state of Kentucky. So please reach out to them, encourage them to call the crisis line here at the center. And I will put our contact information in the chat as well. But again, treat that NTI as much as the real classroom as you possibly can, because our children and families absolutely need that during this difficult time.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Really important information that you shared with us. And then also about the 10-4 rule. And I think if folks go into chat box, if you want to learn more about the 10-4, really for our younger children that we're working with, Face It campaign has some really excellent resources. So in the chat box, if you want to learn more about the 10-4 bruising rule, you can do so at that point. We have about 5 minutes left for this part of the presentation. And whenever we do, when we talk about self-care, we always shortchange it, unfortunately. So for the 3 of you, it's really important that as adults, obviously it's important that we have to take care of our kids that we're working with in the families. But it maybe at this point, if each of you can just maybe 1 or 2 points about self-care from your perspective, what would be helpful for the folks on the Zoom call today. So with that being said, we'll reverse it this time. So we'll start with Elizabeth. 1 or 2 thoughts from your perspective around self-care.
So one of the most important things about self-care is 2 things I want to say. One, I love Tony's suggestion about routine. One of the things that we're doing with staff here is we're talking about keeping their routine and making sure to make time to get out and take a walk, get some fresh air. Get out of the home, get out of your office and do that. And then also making contact with other folks. If you can't, if you can't socially distance with someone, picking up the phone, reaching out to them through Teams or through some other, platform to make that connection with people and talk about how they're doing. We have also encouraged staff to reach out to the EAP, have a conversation about how difficult this time is and the social isolation. Especially if you find yourself gravitating towards unhealthy habits, reach out and ask for help. And also checking in with each other. That's one of the things that's really important. If I'm having a hard time, then probably one of my colleagues or my peers might be as well. So reaching out and having that conversation. We do a lot of social hour here. A lot of our teams, log off at 4:30, 4:45 on a Friday, and they'll have social hour, whether it's having an adult beverage or a glass of tea, whatever works for them, but making sure that they're making contact with each other and laughing. We really emphasize a lot of good humor here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Tony, you're up.
Well, I wish I had about 8 hours instead of 80 seconds to talk about this, because there's a lot that you can do to build resilience. But if I was going to give you the 4 best suggestions, they're mostly the ones I've touched on already and we've talked about. A little bit of exercise, and it does not have to, be training for a triathlon, but a brisk walk 20 or 30 minutes a day makes a world of difference. Making sure you're getting enough sleep, and for adults, that means at least 7.5 to 8 hours. For young people, it's more like 9 to 10 hours. So exercise, sleep, social contact that Elizabeth has talked about already is so critical to health, happiness, and resilience. And the last one is developing some kind of a gratitude practice, even if it's just as simple as at the end of the day, sitting down and making a note of small things that happened during the course of the day that really felt good for you, that felt right. It could be as small as, that second cup of coffee that you had time for in the morning, or big things as well. But paying attention to the positive things that happen and savoring them over the course of the day. If you do those 4 things, makes a big difference.
Thank you, Tony. And Jen, anything else you would like to add around self-care?
The only thing I'll add is that since we've had to completely redefine self-care for so many of us, one of the ways we're really supporting this throughout JCPS is that we're sending some different examples to our families, to our parents, and to our educators that really help getting them thinking about what self-care looks like in a new and different way. Because I know that as an educator, a mom, and someone who just doesn't think about it, I've needed to stop and redefine what it means for me. And so it's just really challenged me to stop and redefine what it means to me personally, other than just, I need to go take a walk. And so we've created a lot of different, back when we were doing the choice boards, we created a lot of self-care choice boards for our students and our educators. And so that's really helped me to stop and think about it in this new setting.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you to our 3 panelists. Some very thoughtful ideas that you shared with us and some strategies. We're blessed here today to not only have our 3 experts on the panel, but so many of you folks are experts in your own professional worlds. And so the next part of our training this morning is we're going to be doing breakout rooms, and so we can learn from each other. Just 1 or 2 quick ground rules. During the breakout rooms, it's really important that we all participate in the breakout rooms. So I encourage you to please unmute yourself, and then also turn on your camera. I think it was Elizabeth who said that when teachers, when you're working with kids, make sure their camera's on so you can see their eyes, right? So when we go to the breakout rooms, if you would, please unmute yourself, and then also make sure your camera's on at that time. In the breakout rooms, we're going to ask 3 questions for the groups to discuss. And the 3 questions are, what can we do to support and resources for children? What additional supports and resources are available? And as a community member, what can you commit to support families and children in your community? What's nice is when we go into the breakout rooms, we will have a facilitator. So the only people who have to take notes are the facilitators, and they know who they are. And they're all somehow affiliated with Bounce. So in just a moment, we're going to go into our breakout rooms. We'll have about 15 minutes in the breakout room. And people will be given a notice, like a minute warning before it's over, or a 30-second warning to wrap it up. And then at that point, we'll come back to the large group, and then the facilitators will kind of share what their conversations were in their breakout rooms. And before I asked Carly to put us into the breakout rooms, I know some people are asking questions in the chat room, and we will continue to monitor the questions, and folks are responding. Some of the Bounce folks are responding to your questions, because we want to make sure that you have the resources that you need after this session this morning to go back and support your kids and families. So,
Tony, can you either repeat those questions or put them in the chat box so we have them in their entirety?
Yes.
The facilitators have them as well. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And I meant Joe, not Tony.
Oh, that's okay, Bev. That's okay. So at this point, Carly, if you would do the magic of putting us all in breakout rooms. Okay. Welcome back. I'm hoping everybody's back from their breakout room. I know in the breakout room where I was, we had a rich conversation, and we had people from different parts of the state. So it was really nice hearing the different perspectives from the folks in our breakout room. So for the next 15 minutes, we're going to kind of learn from each other. And so I know we all tried to address those 3 questions in our breakout room. So at this point, I think what we'll do is I'll just ask each of the facilitators just to give us 1 or 2 points for each of the 3 questions. And that will probably take up the 15 minutes. And then at that point, I'll turn it back over to Naomi, and she'll kind of close out the training this morning. But I'm really looking forward to learning from the other breakout rooms what you folks talked about. So with that being said, Naomi, I think you were a facilitator, correct?
I was. I'm happy to go first since I'll be closing us out. We had a small but mighty team that worked on these 3 questions. And for the first question, it was, what can we do to provide support and resources? Really, we focused on communication, making sure that we are communicating with community partners, sharing resources that are available, exchanging information, but also working to build relationships, especially in this time where we're socially distant. Those relationships are really key to making sure that we're supporting families. For the second question, what additional supports and resources are available? Remembering our mental health providers, even our private providers that are out there. They're in the group that we were in, they talked about play therapy, and even the fact that some organizations got CARES money, and so they're able to provide additional resources that maybe they weren't able to provide before, such as things financially, help with rent and electricity, or with Wi-Fi and technological devices. So remembering that those organizations are out there. And lastly, as a community member, what can you commit to support families and children? So 1, don't be afraid to check in on your family and your friends. We all need to really focus on self-care, not just for ourselves, but remembering our coworkers, because they also need that support. And when we do get calls and we are in the state to help, we have to remember our compassion and empathy, because our folks wouldn't be calling if they didn't need us, and they wouldn't be calling if it wasn't important. And then remembering to follow up and check in to ensure that their needs were met.
Thank you, Naomi. Appreciate that. Good thoughts. Barbara? Unmute yourself, please.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay, our team was amazing too. And it was a team from all across our state. So we kind of ran into some issues and some ideas that are different than they are here in Jefferson County. So we were really glad to get these perspectives. Home visits is one of the supports that they have found very helpful as a resource to children. But they had a couple of projects that were really interesting. They had one of our participants had something called a table project, and it was a box that they would do things like, for example, a table project was have a box that you put your phone in at dinner time. And then on top of that, there were ideas for topics of discussion. So to bring families together. So we thought that was a really good idea. And then a community center and one of the communities combined with some other people and organizations, and they did art projects in a bag for all ages. And the art projects were things for families to do together, or they could be adult oriented. But again, things to bring families together and to connect families together. So those were two really good ideas for the first one. Additional supports and resources. We talked about some of the barriers out in the state, lack of internet service. And so they talked about how some restaurants and churches and businesses came together to provide free hotspots. And then we talked about the barrier of transportation to get to these spots. So that was a concern. And then food insecurity, they were making sure people had food during this time. So communities were putting weekly box of commodities together. And then here in Jefferson County, Dare to Care has been integral, as well as Jefferson County, to make sure kids have food. And then what can you commit to? Again, being there for them, letting people know that there is somebody there if they have a problem, that they will be there for them. And then something that you can do is offer transportation to a hotspot, or to go pick up something for somebody. So these were things my group thought they could commit to.
Thank you, Barbara. Appreciate that. And then Tony?
We had a really vibrant discussion. In the interest of time, I'm just going to touch on a couple of key points that came out of it. One was there was a lot of discussion about the way that everybody is getting double duty out of interventions. So for example, there was a lot of talk about how do we make sure there's enough food in the house and distribution of food, but then also how do we use that distribution of food to do other things? How do we use it as a way of disseminating information about COVID safety and reducing risk of infections? How do we use it as a way of building social connection, both in the family and between the family and others? You know, that there's still bus drivers going out, and what are the role that bus drivers play? Well, they have to get kids from one place to another, but can we train the bus drivers to also look out for the kids and to be aware of challenges and to provide supports for the kids? So how do we get the most out of the infrastructure that we're building and the interventions that we're using by doubling up or tripling up the roles that they play? So there were a lot of wonderful examples of that. And then I think the second thing that we talked about were the challenges that we are all going to be facing as a community, and the way that we need to get even better at doing that. You know, in rural communities, the school buses play critical roles, not just in getting to and from school, but in getting out and around. And those are greatly reduced. Access to the internet is really tough in many rural places. So how do you build out enough hotspots that are comfortable and workable for kids? And how do you work access to those for the kids? And there are resources in the community that we're going to have to draw in to help build a deeper and better and bigger tent of supports to get everybody through this.
Thank you, Tony. And we have about 5 minutes left, and I think we have 4 more folks to go. And I think what we'll hear is a little bit some of the same kinds of thoughts, but for the remaining folks, and we'll start with Jen, is if there's any, in your conversation with your group, was there anything that wasn't covered so far with the other folks who've gone before you for any of the questions? And we'll do the same thing for Shannon, BJ, and Elizabeth.
We hit most of the same ideas, communication, building those relationships. The only other resource that we really touched on was the use of NTI camps to further support parents. That was one that was really brought up. But again, we just hit on a lot of those same ideas.
Thank you, Jen. And Shannon?
Yeah, I think my group just had two creative ideas on how to support parents and kids. One was around utilizing the schools to facilitate more just interaction, social interaction between kids. So after class is done, allowing for kids to get together and encouraging kids to get together to socialize. And then the second one was utilizing grandparents or other supportive adults in the lives of kids and families to really be encouraging and supportive whenever possible. Sending, uplifting text messages, encouraging notes, encouraging emails, just creating some positivity in the space for both parents and kids, or caregivers and kids.
Thank you, Shannon. And BJ?
Well, pretty much we echo what everyone has said about resources, community, combining resources to meet basic needs. One of the creative things that was said among many creative things was about how to foster communication in families, and that's done through cooking. And one of our members of the group has a Facebook and newsletter, sends out recipes for the family to cook together in the evening. So as they're doing that, they have opportunity to talk, to join together, and build that new relationship tradition, Tony, that you were talking about, that new ritual of coming together to cook and eat. So I thought that was a really excellent way, but understanding who is your ally in the community. Churches who have food drives, meeting basic needs such as addressing hunger and so forth. We had a great diverse group scattered throughout the state and wonderful ideas, and I thank everyone for those.
Thank you, BJ. And then Elizabeth.
Yeah, so we had a small, but again, very active group, diverse group from both Jefferson County area and the Lake Cumberland area. We pretty much said the same thing, a lot of things around communication, making sure that people know what's available. One of the suggestions that I think is really important is using social media. You know, people are on social media a lot right now, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And so using the platforms where you know people are going to be to make sure that resources are communicated as well. And then the other thing is just reiterating mental health services. You know, there's been an increase, and this has been across the state. We've seen a drastic increase in suicides, drug overdoses, and people really struggling with depression during this time. So making sure that as you're checking on people, you're connecting them to mental health resources as well.
I think that's all the groups that we had, right, Carly? We had 7 groups. Thank you. I appreciate everybody's, I learned a lot from the discussions in the breakout rooms and some really good ideas and suggestions. Really like the cookbook as a way of connecting our families and our communities. I thought that was really good. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Naomi, and she's going to bring us home. She has a few things she wants to cover the last 15 minutes.
So what we want to do is just to have a way for you to process what you've learned. And so I'm going to share, we're going to do a word cloud, a collaborative word cloud. So if you've never done one of those before, hopefully you can see my screen. I have to move this so I can see it. So what you're going to do, there are several ways that you can do this word cloud. You're actually going to give us one word to describe how you are feeling about supporting families during non-traditional instruction based off of the conversations and the panel discussion today. And so you can use the link that says thementi.com. You can go to thementi.com and use the code, or if you have a smartphone, which most of us do, you can take a picture of the, use a QR reader and take a picture of the code there, and it will take you to this poll. So we'll give you just a few minutes to do that. and then we'll share the results. And so you can only put one word in, but what you can do is if you have multiple feelings, you can do this poll multiple times. So we're looking forward to seeing what you have to say. Oh, it looks really good. I think you guys are going to like it. Okay, so as you can see, the hopeful, the words that are the largest are the words that people are using the most. And so hopeful, it seems like the word of the day so far. I see encouraged, overwhelmed, which is an important, frustrated, optimistic, grateful, challenged, determined. And again, as you can see, it moves in real time. And so this is just a great way, and we'll be able to take a snapshot of this and send this out with the notes when we send out the notes from the breakout room groups. So give you just a second to look and see the word. I see imperative, empathy, energized, available, connections, communication, hopeful, and patient, essential, creative, inspired, meaningful, open, interested, and heard. So hopefully that sums up all of the learning that you had today and just how you're feeling now about non-traditional instruction. And so I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'd like to give you guys an opportunity to ask the panel questions or just have some final thoughts. So are there any questions for the panel?
Naomi, I had a couple questions in the chat, if that's okay, that came up.
Wonderful.
One was for Jen, when you were talking about some of the supports that you all are providing for parents and caregivers. So the question is, how do tip sheets and newsletters and those kind of communications get to the parents and grandparents? Like what is that mechanism that you all are using?
We're doing it a couple of different ways. We've used family engagement, and we've done a couple of Facebook Live sessions with those and allowed parents to, and grandparents and foster parents to ask us questions about how to best support their students. And then we have included those links that way. We've also sent a lot of things out through schools so that the schools can directly give those to the parents. And then we've also done it through the JCPS online. So through the Facebook, the Instagram, and all of the stuff that JCPS sends out. And so we've done it a couple of different ways so that we can hopefully get it to as many people as we can. Sometimes it gets out, sometimes it doesn't, but the goal is to make sure it gets in as many hands as it can, because we want to make sure that our parents know that they're being supported, because it's a really tough time. So.
Thank you. Another question I had was for Tony. When you were talking about routines and the importance of providing routines for families and children, how can parents who maybe are divorced and have joint custody, how can they manage routines with their children?
Boy, it is really hard, and it's easy to say routines are a good thing, let's do it. I know how complicated it gets, both around those situations. Often parents are working jobs where their hours change from week to week, and that makes it difficult. I think that the solution is to do the best you can with it. I think you want to coordinate, for example, in the case of divorced parents and the child may spend time in both places, that the parents want to work together to build a structure around that makes it steady and predictable. It may be that some of the steady and predictable is in one place, some of the steady and predictable is in the other place, but in combination, it's steady and predictable, and there's a routine to it. The issue is not so much that it's got to be perfect, but the more that you can make it predictable and regular, the better off you're going to be. And we know that that's not always possible to do, but the best you can do with it, the better off you are.
Got it. And I have one more question. This is for Elizabeth. And Jen also commented on the chat to help answer this question too. So thank you, Jen. How can we encourage children? Sometimes children are really reluctant to talk about, potential abuse that they're experiencing. How can we encourage children to talk about that?
I think one of the important things is, asking children, how are things going on, or how are things at home? But doing it truly, in a very caring, compassionate way. If you see something going on with a child, or they may not look happy, point it out again, not in an accusatory way, but just say, I really noticed you're not talking as much. Is something going on? And asking those very compassionate questions. Because my experience with kids is they want to talk about it, but they're so afraid, and so they need to feel that sense of safety with that teacher or whoever does ask that question, and to know that I can trust you, and that you're going to be there for me. So a lot of it is just it's so much about how we do it, and the tone that we use and the words that we choose, and reaching out to those kids. I can't say enough. One of the things that concerns me is that people are treating NTIs. We have class and then we leave. Again, treat it like you would a normal classroom.
Jen, did you want to add anything?
I would also say one of the things that we're using or encouraging a lot of our educators to use is what we call check-in forms, to continue to encourage educators to check in with their students on a daily basis. And I've mentioned this in the chat in case anybody wants an example, we can send it to them. But it will also give students that aren't as comfortable telling an educator face-to-face yet, because maybe they haven't met that educator, hey, I'm feeling off today and this is why, or I want to check in with this person because I have a better relationship with him or her. And so this is also a really good way for educators to figure out that there is something going on, and then why. And maybe they want to go talk to the counselor, or maybe they want to go talk to that ELA teacher that they had that beautiful relationship with last year. And so that check-in form is also a really great way to figure out that something's not right and this is why.
Are there any more questions for the panel that we can answer, or they can answer?
Can I ask, hi, this is Nikki. Can I ask, with the young people and maybe with even the families, ways that you could try to support the child or the family's parent in the fact of maybe talking about abuse or something that's maybe not healthy that's happening in a way, that maybe addresses the concern of things in that family changing, or things in that child's life changing. I think people kind of understand or know that once you talk about these things, dynamics are possibly and probably going to change in the family. I think there's a lot of fear around that, and that it's just almost sometimes easier or safer, or whatever the word may be, to just keep things the way they are than to feel like you're the reason that now there's these family changes, even maybe a breaking up the family. It's a lot to have on your shoulders when discussing this.
Absolutely. One of the things that the kids here talk about when they do come to shelter is that they miss the other parent. Even though the other parent was abusive, they miss the other parent. And so there is a lot of fear of my family breaking up, something bad happening to them. And so, being able to process that, being able to talk about that, and working with the family that's still together. One of the things that we do a lot of work here at the center is helping the moms, if that's who's here, or the dads, understand the trauma that the children have experienced, and being able to be supportive of them. That's one of the things that we find that a lot of parents struggle with. But you're right, Nikki, kids are very afraid to share this because they're afraid of the repercussions. They don't want their family broken up. They don't want bad things to happen. So trying to take the family that they do have and making sure that they're strong, and that they are supportive of one another.
Thank you, Nikki, for your question, and Elizabeth for answering. Tony or Jen, do you want to add to that? Okay. I do want to take a minute because we love doing grand rounds. This time we pivoted and did it virtually, and hopefully you found this to be successful. We do want to get your thoughts on topics for grand rounds in the future. We'll put it as a part of, if you have any ideas and you'd like to put them in the chat, please do, but know that we typically send out a survey after the event ends with the notes. We'll also send out the recording so that you'll have that to share with your partners, community partners, family, and friends. But if you have any ideas for future Grand Round topics, we'd love for you to put it in the chat. I just want to end on a note to say, first of all, thank you all for taking the time to be here because this topic is really important to us all. And I thank the panel. Thank you, Jen, Tony, Elizabeth, and Joe. And I also want to take a minute to just say thank you to the group that put this Grand Rounds together. We had a different plan and we pivoted probably a few weeks ago. And again, hopefully you found this pivot to be successful. So thank you for taking the time to be here. I want to show you again the Mentimeter, the word cloud, just so that you can end on a note that is hopeful, because that is our word of the day. So I want you to just take a minute and realize that even though we're going through tough times, we're here to support each other. And I love that hopeful is the biggest word because that's how most of you are feeling. So please take that hope into the rest of this year. Thank you for being here.